Hello, this is Jane Becker again from Keller Williams Real Estate, and today we will be talking about how real estate agents get paid. Well, real estate agents get paid through the transaction. A lot of people believe that because sellers hire a listing agent, that seller is the one who pays everyone. Actually, unfortunately, the seller only has a house. The seller cannot take the house, divide it into pieces, and give it to different people. So what gets actually divided? Well, that's the buyer's, consumer's money. The person who actually goes to the bank, gets a loan, brings it to the closing table, and puts it in the middle, and that's where the funds to pay everybody comes from. What that means is the seller is going to be netting, and the gross amount is going to be paid by the buyer. To make an example, let me grab a stack of my business cards. And we will pretend that this is the money that the buyer brings to the closing table. Now, let's start with the assumption that the seller has hired a real estate agent to help them walk through the process. And that real estate agent was able to find a buyer to buy that home. So there's only one real estate agent involved. Let us also assume that the compensation to that real estate agent is 6%. So the buyer will come to the closing with the money, and the seller will come to the closing with the deed. And at the time of the closing, the exchange takes place. Now, unfortunately, the seller will not collect the full amount because there are fees and costs involved with the process of purchasing that property and selling that property that have to be paid out of the gross purchase price. So at the time of the closing, the money gets divided. If there's a contract with the seller and the listing agent for 6%, at the time of the closing, the listing agent will collect their fee, which is 6%. Well, the seller might have other costs, such as a mortgage. The mortgage has to be paid up at the time of the closing, so the seller pays the mortgage. Well, there's also attorney's fees, so the seller pays the attorney. After all of the fees are paid, what is left over is called the net, and that is what the seller will go home with. So that is how it works when there's only one real estate agent involved. Well, because the listing agent is not always the one that finds the buyer, the listing agent advertises the property on what's called the multiple listing service. It is how should I put it? Well, it's online, and it's a collection of properties that are available to consumers. And when the listing agent, the real estate agent who represents the seller, puts it on the multiple listing service, or the MLS, other real estate agents see that. And if they have a buyer that they're working with, they can bring their buyer to the property. It used to be that the real estate typically was also representing the seller, called the sub-agent, or seller's agent, or traditional agent. That agent might be working with buyers, but they're not working in the relationship of a buyer agency. In that respect, when the when the traditional agent or selling agent or sub-agent brings the buyer to the closing table, once again the buyer brings the money. At the closing, the listing agent will get their 6% commission. All the fees will be paid out, and the seller will take the net. The difference now is that there are two real estate agents involved. And when the listing agent goes back to their office, they promise the other cooperative agent that they will pay a fee, which is typically half of the commission. So in this example of 6%, 3% will be mailed to the other agent after the transaction closes. What that means is, inevitably, the listing agent will receive 3% commission. What happens when the buyer agent comes with the buyer to the closing table? Well, the buyer agent represents the buyer. And that means that the buyer and the buyer agent have agreed that at the time of closing, the buyer agent will get paid the agreed commission. Let us say that the agreed commission is 3%. Let's take that example. The buyer brings the funds that they've received from the bank and puts it on the closing table. The buyer says, I have an agent and I promised that agent 3% commission, so the buyer agent gets paid. Then the rest of the funds are divided. The listing agent will collect 3%, just like they would have done otherwise when another real estate agent is involved. So they're netting the same amount. And the rest goes and is divided with the seller's expenses, the mortgage, the attorney's fees, the taxes, things like that. So the seller also nets the same amount as they would have with any agent. The nice thing is that in that last example, the buyer has representation and so does the seller. So everyone benefits from dividing the commission equally. So that is how real estate agents get paid.